Everywhere I look, TikTok, YouTube, my DMs, people are still asking the same questions about the Idaho murders. But the truth is, most of these questions have answers. In this episode, I break down what the evidence actually tells us and why so many people refuse to believe it. Welcome to Character Analysis, the podcast where I play armchair psychologist and internet detective and try to figure out why people do the ridiculous, crazy, and sometimes very disturbing things that they do. In the months since Bryan Kohberger changed his plea to guilty, we have received a slew of supplemental reports and forensic reports and all kinds of documents in the Idaho 4 case that have filled in a lot of the blanks that have existed since this investigation began. In this episode, I want to go over some of the more common, the more core questions that keep popping up. And I want to provide not just opinions or speculation, but facts from documents to give people an idea of where we stand with this case. Obviously, I'm going to start with the biggest question. Why did the roommates wait 8 hours to call 911? People keep saying, we don't have an answer. We still don't know why. We do know why. For starters, Bethany Funk, in one of her first interviews, is quoted as saying that she and Dylan didn't call 911 because she told Dylan she thought she was imagining things, which to me says that Dylan wanted to call 911, but that Bethany said, "Hey, you know what? Maybe you didn't see what you thought you saw." We saw in the text messages that Bethany said, "Well, Xana was wearing all black," obviously trying to talk Dylan down when Dylan said, "Hey, I just saw a guy in all black." My personal feeling is, at least where Dylan was concerned, I think she knew on some level something very, very bad had happened, and that's what our intuition is. It's intuition is information that conscious mind cannot process quickly enough. And so all we get is sort of this sort of general or overwhelming sense or feeling. When she ran down to Bethany's bedroom and she caught a glimpse of Xana, people keep saying, how did she not see all the red? How did she not? I was going to say red stuff like I'm on TikTok. How did she not see the blood? We don't know what the lighting situation is. But people also have to remember, they're thinking of the crime scene the way police saw it 8 hours later. Between the time that Bryan Kohberger left the house and Dylan was headed down the stairs to Bethany's room, only a few minutes had passed, which means there wasn't a lot of time for Xana to bleed out, to put it bluntly. If you've read the exhibit list that had the injuries, you saw that Xana didn't have many injuries from her waist down, it was her feet facing the door. That was the area of her body that was more visible, was the lower half. Because the door wasn't all the way open. If you remember, I believe it was Bethany who said the door was a little more than partially open. I don't think there was enough time or enough of a view for Dylan to really process what she was looking at. But I will say here that even though Bethany said in one of her interviews that she'd heard of Xana passing out on the floor before, my personal feeling is Dylan thought there might be something wrong. But I think in that moment, because he'd left and she didn't know what was going on, and she was maybe in that fight or flight stage, she did what a lot of people would have done, and she chose self-preservation. Instead of going down that hallway and going into Xana's room, she ran to safety, which is what most of us would have done. You can tell by the phone activity and the short gaps between phone activity that Dylan didn't sleep very much. She might have slept for an hour and a half, but she was on her phone. I happen to think that she was trying to take her mind off things by scrolling social media and whatnot, but I also think she was talking to people, messaging with people, or trying to reach people and trying to get in touch with her roommates. People like to say, "Well, she lied." She said that when she went to Bethany's bedroom, they fell asleep. She didn't lie. She might have fallen asleep 45 minutes, half an hour. She still fell asleep, and she woke up at 7:30 or 6:30 or whatever it was, because we know that there was about an hour, 5 to 6:30 or 6 AM, where she was e editing photos on her phone. She was doing something on her phone. Just because she only slept for a half hour or an hour doesn't mean she didn't sleep, and doesn't mean she lied when she said, "I went to sleep," because she did. People are taking a lot of these answers very literally when they need to be applying nuance. I think, unfortunately, in this situation, Bethany was thinking, "This is Dylan. Dylan gets like this. I have to talk her down." Bethany dismissed what Dylan was telling her because Dylan had a history of overreacting. So why did they wait? Because my belief is Bethany convinced Dylan that she didn't see what she thought she saw, that it wasn't as bad as what she thought it might be. But Dylan, I believe, on some level, knew something wasn't right because she kept trying to contact her roommates. She knew something wasn't right. If she if she thought, "Oh, it's no big deal. You know what? That's just me. I was just overreacting. It was just a prank. It was nothing." She wouldn't have been constantly trying to get in touch with her roommates. Her subconscious mind was saying, "Girl, something's not right here." But she just didn't want to admit it. And again, that is a very normal trauma response. Dylan did something that women are constantly being told to do, which is Dylan was ignoring her intuition, which women are always being encouraged to do, right? We're always being told, A, put your own needs second. Everybody else's needs need to come first. B, don't inconvenience people. You don't want to call the police. You don't even know what you saw. And C, we're always being told we're crazy, we're paranoid, we're being overly sensitive. We're always being told, hey, that very, very reliable voice that you constantly hear or have in your head, ignore it. And people don't understand that. They don't understand that aspect of conditioning that women experience. I think it was as simple as they didn't know, but they did know. At least Dylan, I think, on some level knew but didn't wanna know. That's the answer. And I understand why that's not enough for a lot of people, but here's the thing. We're not important here. Dylan doesn't owe us an explanation. The next question has to do with how people don't understand how one person could have committed this crime. People keep underestimating adrenaline and what adrenaline can do. And they also keep underestimating the fact that they underestimate the amount of planning he did, the very intentional choices that he made. An example being attacking at 4 AM, which really you're really I think that's you're most likely to be in sort of REM sleep, your deepest sleep, which would make it that much harder to react or be able to defend yourself. He chose the last weekend at school before everybody was leaving to go home for Thanksgiving. And keep in mind, there's really only 2 people who would consider that, who would know about school vacation, and that would be a student and a teacher. Dylan said in her interview she felt that whoever it was knew the layout of the house. I agree. I believe he not only had been in that house, I think he'd been in that house when they were asleep. I think he did actual dry runs. I believe that he paid such attention to to their activity and their habits that he knew exactly what he was walking into. And this reminds me of something that I heard on a podcast called Killer Psyche, hosted by Candace DeLong, who is a FBI profiler and FBI agent, former FBI agent and profiler. She was talking about the amount of planning that goes into a crime like this. She said that the planning is iterative, meaning it's repetitive. Watch, refine, return. Watch the house, refine the plan, go back. Is there anything you missed? If anyone is going to know that, it's Kohberger, given his background in forensic psychology and criminology. I believe he was in that house while they were asleep. I wouldn't be surprised if he stood in those bedrooms and watched them sleep. I firmly believe he knew exactly what he was walking into and knew where to go and knew who was in each bedroom, with the exception of maybe Dylan. Now, and it's interesting because Dylan said in her interview that he never tried her door. He never tried to open her door. This was in her November 17th interview that just came out last week. Very interesting that he didn't try her door. Is it that he didn't know it was a bedroom? Is it that he wasn't there for her? What was the reason for that? If you remember the Reddit survey that Kohberger wrote when he was at DeSales. Now, this is based on a script. He did not come up with these questions. This was an actual script already pre-written, but Kohberger adjusted his. The original script was asking offenders, what were they thinking? What were they thinking when they chose a target? What were they thinking before they approached the target? What were they thinking after they left or after they committed the act? Kohberger asked not just what were they thinking, but what were they feeling? Now, remember, Kohberger was somebody who spoke of feeling numb and detached. Kohberger, in my opinion, had been planning these murders for some time. And I think he not only wanted to know exactly what he needed to do to commit it, I think he did not want any, not so much surprises. He wanted to, what am I going to be feeling at this point? Am I going to be elated? Am I going to be paranoid? How am I going to be feeling throughout this so that he could prepare himself mentally for this, which is what I think he was doing when he was driving around and around the house. I believe that he was not so much psyching himself up, but getting himself in the headspace of committing these murders. Once inside that house, now his own fight or flight is kicking in. And when that happens, you're going to produce a surge of adrenaline. Or you're going to produce a lot of different brain chemicals, but adrenaline is one of them. Adrenaline is, you become, I won't say a superhero, but what it does is it makes you faster, quickens your reaction time. You see better, you're stronger. Now take all of that and include a K-bar knife and think of who his targets were. Drunk, asleep, mostly women who were half his size and weight. When you think of it in that context, there's no question that one person could have committed these crimes. Since we're talking about fight or flight, something else to keep in mind is many people, here's another question. Well, why didn't they scream? Why wasn't there any screaming? When you are in the midst of a trauma, when you are in the midst of fight or flight, your brain, your prefrontal cortex, which is the reasoning center of your brain, it goes offline. It's bypassed. The brain relies on a part of your brain called the amygdala to decide and to determine, is this a threat? Because they don't want you to reason. They don't want you to pause or hesitate, because that could lead to more danger. It could put you in more danger. When this happens, that message gets kicked out to all of the different systems, right? And I won't say shuts down, but it prioritizes the functions that we need to survive. Your heart beats faster so that there's more blood going to the muscle groups that you're going to be using. Your vocalization, that's not a priority. Your digestive system, not a priority. They're sort of dulling all of these non-priority systems so that with that adrenaline, you're working at optimum performance. Part of his planning, I believe, was how to incapacitate very quickly. He knew exactly where to injure these victims so that there wouldn't be screaming. Another very common question that I hear, why didn't he attack Dylan? It does give you some pause when you think of what she said in that interview, that he never tried her door. Why? Why didn't he try her door? And the thing is, maybe he did and she just didn't hear it. But if he didn't, why didn't he? And why did he leave and not attack Dylan? My personal feeling, especially after we learned that they found a balaclava, if he knew that Dylan had seen him wearing a balaclava, I believe that he would have disposed of any balaclava that he owned. So the fact that he didn't makes me wonder, did he see Dylan at all? If he did, I think the answer is he was spent, because once you get that surge of adrenaline, you can't control when you crash. But once you start that crash, you're depleted. He may have seen her, and Murphy, he's going crazy, he's barking. Kohberger is autistic, so he could have been overstimulated by the noise. He didn't know if Dylan had already called 911 because remember, he heard her. He heard her yelling for Kaylee and for Xana. So he had no idea. Did she already call 911? I got to get out of here. He just wanted to get out. Whether he saw her or not, I can't say for sure. I really can't. But there's another possibility, which is he knew, and this could explain why he didn't go in the rooms. He wanted to leave to other potential suspects. He knew these two girls who are also in the house. If I don't go near them, people are going to wonder why. And he was right. I mean, let's be honest. He was absolutely right in that assessment. Leaving the two surviving roommates gave him a sort of not an out, but a fall guy. I think that's a better term. People constantly ask, why would he attack people where there's no connection? First, we don't know if there was no connection because he wiped a lot of his devices. I think it was very intentional that he chose people that he had no connection to. I've never thought there was a target. I've always thought the target was the house. So I think he made a very conscious choice to choose victims that could not be traced back to him. Part of the reason why the scene was so brutal and so graphic, and that these attacks were just so savage, really, he wanted police to think that it was someone that knew them. Which is why, to this day, they still can't say who was the target. Was it the residence or was it the house? Because remember, they also didn't find any forced entry in the house, which immediately is going to make law enforcement think, okay, if there's no forced entry, it's either somebody who was in the house or somebody who knew how to get into the house. But they also had to consider, and I'm sure they did, well, it could have been somebody who was watching the house, who knew about this door, because the door was a sliding glass door, which is very easy to get into or to unlock. And it also appeared to be missing that dowel that they needed to make sure someone couldn't, jimmy it off the tracks. If he'd been watching the house, he knew that. Something else that makes me think this really wasn't about the victims, that there was no one target. The forensic analysts who analyzed the data on his phone said that after the murders, he was researching the victims. You would think that would be something he did beforehand, but he did it after. He could have done it before, it could have been wiped. I don't think he knew much about these people. I'd be surprised if he even knew their names. And I know that sounds crazy, but I think that the target always was the house. I believe that people say, why would he choose Moscow or Idaho, a death penalty state? I think he knew Moscow PD, they hadn't had a homicide in almost a decade. They're not going to know. They're not going to be as adept or as savvy as, say, Pullman. He wanted somewhere where nobody knew him. And if you listen to all the friends and the families, When they found out his name, they thought, "Who is this?" Even Dylan and Bethany, they were sure it was somebody that they knew. They all believed that. That's what Kohberger wanted. I believe that he chose Moscow because he knew Moscow PD would be out of their depths, which I think they were. I think they did an excellent job given the situation, but I do think they were out of their depths. I believe Kohberger knew that he'd be committing this crime in a town where he was less likely to be identified or caught right away, if at all. The next question I hear a lot is, why can't they place him in the house? Yes, there's DNA on a sheath, but they don't have any fingerprints. There's nothing. Why can't they place him in the house? First and foremost, people need to understand that people get convicted all the time on circumstantial evidence, even if there's no or not much physical evidence at the scene. So this is not uncommon. In this case in particular, there was nothing placing him in the house because, again, he planned. This was someone with a criminology background, someone who'd studied crime scenes, who knew how to suit up, who knew how to prepare and what to wear to make sure he didn't leave behind any fibers. Although I will say something's very interesting to me, and it just occurred to me the other night. I don't ever remember Dylan saying that she saw him wearing gloves. Not once do I remember her saying she saw gloves on the suspect. And she saw him carrying something in front of him. Remember, she thought it was originally thought it was some sort of mini, a vacuum part. So she saw him carrying something, but she never mentioned that he was wearing gloves. Now, it could just be she just didn't see it. Or it could be one of those things where when we're experiencing a trauma, our short-term memory prioritizes what's important. What do we need to know to make sure that if this happens again, we survive? And then over time, as the trauma subsides, which can take hours, days, weeks, over time, those other little small details, they're easier to recall. They sort of rise to the surface a bit. What gets me about this question is that the answer is so obvious. What do you mean you don't understand how he didn't leave anything behind? He wrote papers on this. He studied criminals who committed crimes like this. He knew what they did, and he followed in their footsteps. A lot of people want to know, why didn't Bill Thompson make Bryan Kohberger tell him certain details? Why didn't he make him allocute? Because allocution it's a legal right that a suspect has. They can do it if they want, but they cannot be forced to do it. So he could not force Kohberger to allocute. I'm going to say this. I feel like this is an area where Thompson really dropped the ball. I know. I don't know his thought process. Of course, I'm on the outside. I'm somebody who wants that information, but knows I'm not entitled to it. I don't understand why he didn't say, okay, before we agree to this, where's the knife? Where's the bloody clothes? More importantly, why? Why did you do this? Now, Bill Thompson says that the BAU unit of the FBI told him that even if he did give this information, you probably wouldn't understand his methodology or why he did it. I think that's kind of a BS excuse. And Thompson said, even if he did answer it, we didn't believe that he would tell us the truth, but why not try? And I also wonder if Thompson worried that if they pushed, if they had conditions for this plea deal, I wonder if Thompson worried that if we push, he's gonna say, "No, forget it, let's go to trial." I don't believe for a second that Bill Thompson didn't feel they had a solid case. Just knowing no matter how circumstantial that evidence was, the DNA on the sheath, that's hard to get around. I believe that Bill Thompson knew, listen, once you're in there, once you pick that jury, you don't know who's gonna be on that jury. You don't know how things are going to go. And there's always that chance. There's always that chance that someone is going to say, "You know what? I don't feel that they really proved their case." And Kohberger would walk. I don't think Bill Thompson wanted to risk that. I don't think that, especially at the end of his career, I don't think he wanted that kind of blight, that kind of mark on his record when this was so he didn't want to go out that way, I guess. I can't say that I blame him. People always want to know, well, what was the motive? If there's no connection, what was the motive? People need to understand that There doesn't need to be a personal connection in order for something to be personal to the perpetrator. This could be a case of ideology, right? This could be a desire for control or power, which is what I think was one of the motivating factors. He hated women. We've been presented with information that supports this belief. If you read the ISP documents, there was statement after statement after statement from his peers at WSU who said he was a creep. Don't forget, they found 2 IDs from 2 women in a glove in a box at his parents' house. There's the story from the coworker, this is alleged, that she came home one night to find a cake in the microwave and items on her vanity lined up. And she went back to work and she told Bryan about it. And out of nowhere, the key to her apartment that hadn't been there before was suddenly back in its place. These stories, they're out there from people close to him who knew him. I've always believed he worked his way up. This is why I say he went into the house and I believe watched them. I think that he had been gearing up and gearing up and gearing up for this night for years. And I think it started with looking through windows, being a peeping Tom, then breaking into the house, then doing things to let them know that he'd been there. There's a power there. He can control them with fear. So he had this history of not liking women. That alone is a motive. There have been plenty of cases, BTK, Richard Ramirez, that had no connection to their victims. Why were they doing it? Because they're crazy. That's why. That's it. That's the answer. People are trying to make sense of something that makes absolutely no sense. If you are a rational, sane person, you're never going to be able to understand someone who's irrational and insane. People want that motive to be obvious. Oh, they were jealous. Oh, they were obsessed with them. Oh, they owed them money. They didn't agree with their religious beliefs. That's I think something people have a easier time digesting that because they can see proof of it. And even though we have proof that he did not relate well to women, that he had anger towards women. I think it says a lot about our society that when presented with the possibility that this was about his deep-seated rage towards women, people are saying, "No, that doesn't make sense." It does. It makes perfect sense to women, I think. To women, it makes perfect sense. But to many people, they don't want to accept it. I made a TikTok video about this a few weeks ago while watching scenes from Scream, the first Scream movie, where Billy Loomis is talking to Sydney, and she says, "Why? Why are you doing this?" And he says, "It's a lot scarier when there's no motive, Sid." He was right. People, we want an answer. We want to understand why did this happen so that we can make sure it doesn't happen to us, so that we can make ourselves feel better. And that lack of a tangible motive, it's one of the things that keep people talking about this case. A big question, especially of late over the last few months, why did he ask for a plea deal? People wonder, well, is it that a week before he found out his sister was on the witness list? He'd known for months that his sister was on the witness list. I don't think that had anything to do with it. Personally, I think he was always going to do this. Or at the very least, I think in the beginning, and if you go back and you look at the very early hearings and photos, and you look at his posture and his body language, he's very cocky. The way he would sit and steeple his hands and smile at her, but over time, you started to see that confidence fade because he was learning piece by piece what evidence they had and realizing that the arguments that he was trying to make, they weren't floating. And they tried everything, right? She wanted a continuance and she did the alternate perps. That was the Hail Mary, the alternate perps. And Judge Hippler said, fuck no, you did not prove your case here. There's a threshold that you need to meet, a threshold of criteria that would support your theory that it could have been this person or that person. And she didn't meet it. She didn't meet the threshold. People keep saying, "Well, why is this redacted so much? If they didn't do it, well, why is it redacted?" Because from the first day of this investigation, the internet went insane and started harassing and doxing people and making accusations. So they had to be exceptionally careful. Do I think that they could be hiding things? Absolutely. I absolutely think that's possible. But I think the bigger overarching reason was this case was so insane that they were doing what they could to mitigate the chances of these innocent people having their lives ruined. Not that not that they've succeeded. Jack Showalter's life is forever altered. Doesn't matter. Not only has all his dirty laundry been aired, but his name's always gonna be tied to this case, the same as Kaylee's ex-boyfriend, the same as Brent Kopaka, which is I just can't believe that that's how we treated a veteran, someone who fought for this country, that we're gonna besmirch his legacy. People's lives, their legacies have been ruined over this case. I think that's why there was so many redactions. Something else I hear quite a bit, another question, why do people think there's more to the story? That, I believe, has to do with the way the information has been disseminated and shared. It's been done in such piecemeal that people are taking a lot of the information independently and not looking at it in totality, meaning they're not looking at the hearing transcripts. They're not looking at the press releases. They're not watching the press conferences and watching the hearings and reading the court documents and reading the reports and the supplemental reports. The reason why the conspiracy theories have grown so much is mainly because so many people have hopped on this case in the last maybe 4 or 5 months who know nothing about this case, who are only relying on what other creators say and the ISP and the Moscow documents and the forensic report. They're not looking at the totality. They're not looking at the whole thing. And so what they think are inconsistencies aren't really inconsistencies because they're answered in court documents. And the final question, the one I get asked very often, what do you think happened? Let's back up. I am of the belief that it was Kaylee who said someone's here. I believe that what Dylan heard is what happened. Now, we know from Jack's interview that Kaylee had left him a message saying, "I have your vape, come over to the house to get it." I think Kaylee went downstairs waiting for Jack. I think she had the vape with her. Murphy was with her. She waited for some time. She had the music on. Maddie could have been there, but we didn't hear that Dylan said that she heard Maddie. I think Kaylee waited. He didn't show up. I think she went upstairs to her room, probably around 4, because Dylan was entering a contact in her phone at 3:51, which means that's around the time she was awake. And when Kaylee went upstairs, Dylan said to herself, "Okay, now I can go to sleep." So I think Kaylee went upstairs around 4 a.m., was in her room, maybe even in the bathroom. And in a few minutes later, Kohberger enters the house. He gets upstairs. He walks into Maddie's room and he starts the attack. Kaylee either hears something in Maddie's room and thinks maybe it's Jack. Maybe it's Jack that came over, because I do wonder if she heard him talk. And so I think she grabbed the vape because it was Jack's vape, and she had her phone, and she comes out of her room and maybe sees something, some activity, or hears something. And remember, Dylan said that whoever said someone's here was standing at the top of the stairs. That would be right outside Kaylee's bedroom. Kaylee came out of her room. I think she said, "Someone's here," walked into Maddie's room. In the time that it took for her to say it and then walk into Maddie's room, he ducked behind the door. She walked through the door. He ambushed her, and he forced her onto the bed, or she fell back onto the bed, and there was a struggle. We learned in the forensic report that the blood on the exterior of Maddie's bedroom door was Kaylee's. We learned that there was blood on the ceiling outside of Maddie's bedroom, and that there was blood on the upper casing of the bathroom door across from Maddie's bedroom, and that there was blood on the west wall right next to the door. In my opinion, something happened in that doorway. Once he was done there, I think he walked downstairs. I've always believed he went straight to Xana's room, and the ISP document said that they believed he walked to Xana's room. He walked down the hallway to Xana's room. I think it's very interesting that Dylan said she heard crying coming from the bathroom. The bathroom and the bedroom were just inches away from each other. So why the distinction? Why did she say the bathroom? And the only thing I can think of is the acoustics. Whatever she heard, the sound, it sounded like she was in the bathroom, right? There's that echo because it's a smaller room. I think Xana was coming out of the bathroom because she had the phone on the bed. And, we take our phone everywhere. Sometimes we take it to the bathroom. But I would think if there's one place you don't take your phone, it's the bathroom. And remember when they showed up, the toilet had been used, it hadn't been flushed. And I think Xana came out of the bathroom and he attacked Xana and then Ethan. And then we know from investigators that he went back to Xana. I think Murphy then started barking very loudly. Dylan was yelling for Kaylee and Xana. He realized he had to go and he left. So that's what I think happened. That's a lot of questions. If you have some questions that you feel are unanswered, I would love to hear them. You can send them to me at chris@mycharacteranalysis.com. You can send them to me on Instagram. I'm at mycharacteranalysis, or at TikTok, mycharacteranalysis. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any episode ideas, I'd love to hear them. Talk soon. Bye.